he did a lot of the later and earlier Parasound stuff. He did the CTC as well. And layout is just as important as everything else. I hate to say it, but it's so. I can't do layout myself.
Okay.
Not really.
So what was the retail price of that preamp? I heard it was pretty expensive, but I never knew what it was.
Well, we tried to make it the most expensive preamp possible because we were only trying to sell it to certain crazy people, like us.
Yeah.
And we made it as expensive and as exotic as we could at the time. And we started off with about $10,000, which was an unheard of price at the time. This is about 1998, maybe. And it kept going up not because of us, but because our vendors kept increasing their prices. So our potentiometers doubled in price. Our boxes, our cases doubled in price.
Wow.
It was a real pain. In fact, in the end, after we made about 45 or more units, I don't know exactly how many, we actually gave up. We were saying this isn't even worth it anymore because we'd have to keep increasing our prices to the point where, we felt bad about it.
Yeah.
But we weren't making any money.
Yeah.
Not real money, not profit. Maybe we were getting paid some sort of technician's time per hour or something.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Well,
no real anything else.
How many of those were produced? Are they still around?
No, they're about 40, at least 45, maybe 47 or 48. Okay. I can tell because of the number of units. See, we bought the boards, which cost us $50 a piece. That's per channel. That's a raw board. That's just a raw piece of stuff. I mean, we made it out of the best. We made it out of pure Teflon and stuff like that. We had it all fancied up, space age. Yeah. And it cost us so much that I know from the number of boards I have left, pretty much that we didn't make 50. We might have made 47 or 48.
Okay. So
this is Pete. I'm sorry. I just joined in. Is that you're talking about the CTC preamp or the Vendetta?
Yes, the CTC.
Well, yeah. The Vendetta could be built into the CTC.
Peter.
It could be built in it?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So
okay, but which one did you make 45 units of?
Well, but the one with just the line amp, the 45 units, there were maybe 5 units made with the Vendetta in it. It cost $5,000 extra to put a Vendetta in it. So it wasn't small potatoes. I have one. I love it.
Yeah. So do you think at the time it was the best preamp out there?
Yes.
Wow.
That's what we were trying for. I mean, we can't be absolutely sure of anything. The only thing that we had is feedback from other countries and other people. We sold most of them overseas. And we had one guy in Singapore who would put it up against everything in the world, just about. They get stuff from Hong Kong and other places. And we take on anything. He took on everything.
Wow. All right. Well, John, I'm going to go. You got my email with our list of questions?
Yes. Sure.
I'm going to just run through the list here and ask you these. Let's start with the first one. What attracted you originally to the audio world?
I actually just started off with playing the guitar.
Oh.
And when I was 15 years old, and then I had to learn a little bit about the electronics because I went to an electric guitar and started in a little rock and roll band when I was in high school. And then I found that I had the ability to hear acoustic differences between guitars better than most people.
Oh.
I mean, I could just, and at that time in life, that was around 1958 when I got started, or so. But when I was in 1960 or so, when folk music became more important, then folk guitars or classical guitar, the
Yeah.
you know,
Where were you?
non-electronic guitars. I already had a Fender Stratocaster, so
Oh,
I already knew what electric guitars could do. But I wanted a really good classical guitar, and I really found one in a music store by accident. Really, it was just so good. I could never replace. It was stolen from me, and I never could replace it.
oh, an
I mean,
acoustic.
it's just like they're all different. You know what I mean? They could be made by the same manufacturer, but
Yeah.
once in a while they make a winner.
Yeah. Yep. So where were you living in those days, John?
I was living in the San Jose area.
Okay. California boy.
Yeah, San Jose, south of San Francisco.
Sure.
It was
Sure.
out in the middle of the country by comparison. Then we had a lot
Yeah.
of mountains and stuff. We didn't have this. It wasn't as built up.
Okay. So let's move on to the next question. What do you consider to be audio's biggest achievement in the past 50 years?
Well, interestingly enough, I believe that it's direct disc records. Now that wasn't a new because back in the old days before tape recorders, they used to make all this records disc, direct disc, but then they stopped making direct disc records, and then they went back to direct disc records. That was Sheffield and Crystal Clear and a bunch of other guys, and they gave us a reference to design equipment around. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be as able to build or know what we really have as far as electronic equipment and speakers too, of course. I was told this back 52 years ago when I was working at Ampex designing analog tape recorders. And I thought, just like everybody else, well, analog tape recorders are the right way to go. Then you put it on a record if you have to distribute it out to the world. Well, the guys told me, John, have you ever heard a direct disc record? Which I had never heard. And then when they came out, I realized what they were talking about. The analog tape recorders can be good, but they always add more mud to the system because it's twice as complicated a process. You have to record it, and then you have to record it again.
When was direct disc? When did that come out, John?
What?
When was direct disc invented, so to speak?
Well, it was invented in 1920. But if you really get down to it, or 1910, or whenever the record was first made. But they stopped doing that when they had analog recorders. So around 1949 or 50, they started recording everything on tape recorders, Ampex tape recorders usually. And then they would transfer that. The tape recorder makes it easier to edit, get it really right. If they make a mistake, you can edit it out. It's convenient. You can, the disc cutting process itself is pretty horrendous. And especially with LP albums. Because with an LP album, you got to realize it's got to go 30 minutes. Well, you got to be able to play for 30 minutes on the side straight. I mean, the band has to keep going. It might have a moment's pause for a break, but they can't go have coffee or something.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Well, there's a lot of stress involved in that.
All right. Let me go on to the next question I have for you. What was the most impressive system you ever heard? Now, you've heard a lot of different systems, home systems.
No, I really haven't. No, I haven't. But I really haven't. I don't care that much to go shopping about that sort of thing. But the Wilson Audio Wham system has always impressed me at every level. Every time I've ever heard it properly set up, it just knocks me over. I used to go with Dave Wilson and his wife many years ago when his grown-up children now were just little kids. We used to go over, and my friends and I, and we would have an evening with Dave and just play records. And it was glorious. I mean, it was really something.
At his home then?
Yeah, at his home. He lived here in California at the time.
Oh, he did. Okay.
Yes, and then that's where I heard the Wham before that on its shows, the same unit, but he had it set up at his home, and I mean it was just glorious.
Was the Wham his first big speaker then?
Yes.
commercial success?
Well, it was all of $28,000 when it started. And that was considered outrageous.
Yeah.
Just absolutely outrageous at the time. But there it was.
Yeah.
And then now it's what, almost $1 million.
Okay. Tell us what your system consists of for loudspeakers, et cetera, John?
Well, I'm actually stuck with Wilson. Dave Wilson and his gave me a set of Wilson speakers back in the late '80s, Watt puppies, and I got caught in a firestorm without any insurance or anything, and they were lost, of course. And I had to rebuild my system, and I found a pair of Watt ones, which I still have, virtually identical to the ones I lost. I started with that, and I used that for years and years. I added a subwoofer to it, not Wilson's at the time or even later, but I also I did that, and then I had a subwoofer added. It worked pretty well. And then Wilson, Dave himself, gave me a new set of speakers. So I have a pair of Sasha speakers,
wow,
which are not bad.
Yeah, great.
They're not bad. They're not bad.
Yeah,
They're good. I wish I had the newest Sasha, but the DW. But no, well,
yeah.
you know, you can't look a gift horse in the mouth. You know.
That's right. What do you have for powering it, etc.?
I use a Parasounds. I for the last 25 years, I've used Parasound power amps.
You don't use your mono blocks?
No, I don't actually. There's a reason for that. First of all, the room takes in the space, but beyond that, it's the I can't turn things up very loud around here, even for the speakers that I have, because I get complaints from my neighbors. You know, I got the woman upstairs, and she'll send me a note under the door. You know, we like your music, but we don't want to hear it anymore. You know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I've had that happen to me 2 or 3 times. So I have to be careful with that. Sure. And that keeps I do have a JC5 right now, which does the job. And before that, I had a prototype that was never built. That was an overbuilt first generation Parasound power amp of mine from the early 90s.
Do you listen to turntables mostly, or are you a streamer, or what's your sources?
I'm not a digital fan. I mean, I listen a lot, of course, with TV and so forth. I listen all the time to digital, you know, as it is. But I don't like it much. I've been experimenting with that, but I don't have anything to write great about that. I have an Oppo 105, which is pretty good for general purpose sort of playing, but it's not great. It's not as good as it should be. Digital to me is not really yet there. I may be wrong. If I had enough money, maybe I could see better. But it will take a really fast system, lots and lots of sampling, probably DSD at the highest possible rate would be the thing I would go for.
Right. Okay. When you're building a new product, do you make the voicing decisions, or do you do that more by committee?
There's no committee, and I don't really make voicing condition. I don't really voice anything. I really don't. But I will say this. I know I use certain components that I have found sound right. So I might say I'll specify a capacitor. Like one of the things that I do that's very important is I use what's called a reliable, that's the name of the company, capacitor. I use a polystyrene for EQ of the phono stages that I use. It was done with a Vendetta. It was done with Parasound. It was done with every phone. I just developed a new over $10,000 phono stage for Audible Illusions. That same capacitors everywhere. And that's magic, you know. It's like It's like, I don't want to go away from that.
So you're saying you rely more on the gear rather than the committee or your own personal hearing?
Well, of course, it has to pass my test. I mean, it's got to listen. I mean, what you do, all I do is this. At first, you don't hear anything. I mean, the proud papa syndrome is always there. I mean, you can't listen to your own stuff objectively that easily. But one thing you can do is listen to something for a long period of time, especially semi-consciously, not really paying attention. And after a while, you kind of get an idea that there's something wrong, or there's a signature, there's a certain coloration that's added that's consistent with that particular product. Then that's what I do. But it takes long-term listening. I'm getting too old to do that really hot stuff, you know, where when I was 21 years old, I could really hear out, you know, really hear out there much farther than 20, but not anymore. No way. You're talking, but I can't hear you. No, you're talking, but I can't hear you.
Jeff, you're muted.
Okay, sorry. I don't know how that happened. All right. Well, here's a question I'm curious to hear your story on. What was the wildest or funniest story that you can share with us about your days with the Grateful Dead? And maybe you can just tell people who may not know what you did with the Grateful Dead back in the day.
Well, I designed electronics for them from 1970 and then off and on through 1973. And the deal is with the Dead, they wanted first class sound, and they weren't. And they were using tubes. They had gotten first class sound with vacuum tubes, and they found that the problem is that as they traveled, the vacuum tubes just wouldn't hold up, and then they would lose the vacuum tube. So they wanted me to help them build something that would be solid state and sound pretty good as a sound mixer. And I helped build a sound mixer. I specified the ICs and the basic circuitry, and it measured just fine. So they took it out on the road. Now this is just part of the funny story. They took it out on the road and they used it for a while. And they put the vacuum tube stuff in the, as a backup, in the closet, you might say, or in the back of the truck. And so one day, the lead guy, decided that he didn't like the sound of my electronics that much. And he thought maybe he could improve them by running it on batteries. So he got some batteries, the right voltages, I presume, but he put them in backwards, blew the whole thing up. So they had to go back to tubes. When they went back to tubes, they said, we're not going back to that solid state crap anymore. But they fired me, actually, and let me go. And I learned a lesson from that. I learned that what you measure isn't necessarily what sounds good. I'd never really listened to the thing. I just measured it, and it was ICs. I mean, it measured well, just like they do today. It was the best ICs available at the time.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest thing. I mean, there were a lot of little pranks they used to do. I mean, I remember we were coming back from a New York gig, and I was with a girlfriend who met me in New York. And we were coming back from Long Island. We had this sort of bus, the band bus. And the roadies decided to get my girlfriend real high. And she was a big pot smoker. I wasn't, but she was. So they got her real high. And I just remember when we got off the bus, she just started wandering off in a strange direction. We were in the middle of Harlem or something. I said, by the way, come with me. She doesn't remember. The same woman doesn't remember. I asked her later. She doesn't remember the incident, but I do. And that's the kind of pranks the Grateful Dead would play on each other sometimes, or other people. Sometimes they would dose you, like they'd put LSD in beer or something. You have to be careful.
Wow. That's scary.
Not really. Not if you know what else. You know,
If you've had it, I guess you know what
yeah,
you're
if you
getting.
don't know what you're doing, oh boy, you know, it could scare the heck out of you. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And they used to do that as pranks. I never was around one that very specifically, but that actually happened. But I got ghosted a couple of times by accident, not by them, but by you know, just people in the neighborhood, you might say. So,
Yeah. Well, Jerry Garcia, was he someone you consider to be very talented?
oh, absolutely. Not only could he play amazingly well, but he knew his music. He knew his music, what he was playing, the sound of things, how to make things happen in a much more subtle way than is normally presented as a whole. And we used to, with the wall of sound, we built this wall of sound, you know, with this. This was a project after I got rehired after about a year's hiatus. I was hired back because they wanted to build this wall of sound. And in the wall of sound, we actually had open back cabinets because Jerry preferred open back cabinets for his guitar. And we would actually sit, I'm talking about the roadies and me. And I was sort of a half a roadie. And at the time, because I'd have to help, you know, with some of the stuff. And we'd actually sit in back. So the open back cabinet, we'd hear the back part of, you know, the open back cabinet. The rest of the music would go forward and would be completely blocked off from us. So we could separate his guitar picking from the rest of the band. That was great. That's how good he was.
Yeah.
We'd have to sit back, you know, back before, you know, not being able to see anything. We're backstage, you know, but we liked it there. We liked the sound of, yeah, hear him pick. He was brilliant. And he taught me a lot too. He caught me a couple of times being very enthusiastic about, especially special effects. And he clued me and says, "Hey, Curl, that's a special effect. Don't kid yourself. That's not improving the sound. That's you know, it's just an add-on. You know, it's a sweetener."
Yeah.
If I can make a comment about the Grateful Dead, back in the around 69, 70, and 71, my girlfriend and I, who became my wife, we saw the Grateful Dead several times. And back then, groups didn't sound that good. But even back then, I noticed the Grateful Dead sounded really good.
Well, yeah,
They were like the first group that sounded good. And I don't know if that was your work or not.
no, it wasn't really. Although I worked there in 1970 and in 71, that was mostly Osley, the guy who made all the LSD. You remember him? Bear. We call him Bear. You know, Bear's the one that did he found these 350 watt Macintosh power amps that are really, really good. Even today, they're really, really good. And then he found these Ampex tube mixers, which were open loop tubes, just tubes. He did it all tube, and that's what you heard. It was all tubes. And then we have for the tweeters and the, you know, the higher frequency stuff where you didn't need as much power, we would use Mac 75s, and they were the, you know, the tube units. We never liked the Mac stuff. We had to use it in the end because they stopped making the tube stuff. So by 1973, we couldn't get the tube stuff anymore. So what we did is we took the tube stuff and put it on the tweeters so that they would never be, you know, they would be the best, smoothest sound. And the mid-range and the bass, we put the solid state stuff. Solid state's really tough to make sound really nice on the top end. It's almost impossible.
On the top end, you say?
Yeah, you know, the high frequencies, not high frequencies. It never sounds quite right.
Oh. Okay.
There are lots of
Interesting. Well, give us one or two so we learn something.
Oh no, I don't know. Are you guys into tubes? Or are you not into tubes? I actually think tubes are awfully good. I've been designing against them for 50 years, but it doesn't mean that they're not good.
True. Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah, they're
go ahead. Can't hear you again. You're muted.
Oh, can you hear me now, John?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go on to a question from one of our members. And this comes from Keith, who asked you a question a moment ago. And it is, does an audio engineer achieve individual recognition, for example, yourself or Nelson Pass, etc., with neutral designs or color designs or something else?
Neutral. For me,
Neutral.
at least, it's neutral. For Nelson,
Okay.
I don't know. Nelson has his own sweetening mentality, but not me.
Okay.
I don't. The only reason I have a reputation is because I used very sophisticated topologies and circuitry, direct couple and all that, in stuff that wasn't done that way before. I started, 45, 50 years ago, making this exotic stuff, both for
Right.
professional and then consumer.
Okay, great. He had a second question, and I will go to that now. Keith says, my amp and preamp are 25 years old. Should I consider upgrading them? ? And then in parentheses, I do not enjoy audio shopping in today's environment unless it is.
I thought about that, and I even talked to a friend of mine about it. I'm using an amplifier mostly during the day. It's on right until we speak. It's a little Parasound. It's the smallest one they ever made in my name. And it's 25 years old or more. I don't care. And I'm not going to change it.
Okay.
The latest ones won't sound as good. I just know that. I know because, see, you get different kinds of engineers. I'm not the only engineer at Parasound. I'm just the guy who's kind of the consultant to tell people how to do it, at least where I think it'll sound the best. But the other engineers, they want to put specs in. They want to put power and cost effectiveness and bang for the buck. I mean, they really do want this more than they want the absolute sound. And so they'll actually compromise the device if I'm not careful. I have to watch them. They tried to, the latest JC1 Plus, they tried to compromise it, and I stopped them. In other words, they wanted to make it a 500 watt per channel amp, and we were moving from a 400 watt per channel. It's sort of obvious, it's like advertising. We didn't change the heatsink size. See, they decided not to make a bigger heatsink. Well, what happens then? You get more power, but at your low levels, you starve the circuits. You starve the output stage. You can't help it because the thing will overheat.
Yeah, you told me that he limited the maximum size unit you can build, correct?
That's right.
So you can't go above the size you built to, I imagine.
Well, that's a pretty good size, but
Yeah.
it especially in mono, it's pretty effective. But it won't, as I try to get into the horsepower race of should I do 550 watts or 600 watts, compete with, that is hard to do with this heatsink size. I won't do it.
All right.
I can build a bigger amp. I've built bigger amps before with other
Sorry to interrupt. After many years, you changed the electrolytic capacitors on those amps.
I don't know. What does an electrolytic capacitor do? It probably increases its base. I mean, its leakage a little bit. It probably has lowered its actual absolute capacitance, and it probably has raised its series impedance. But I don't think that's really. But it depends on the capacitor. Now, in my designs, my particular designs, I don't have any coupling capacitors. I only have power supply capacitors. So for my power supply capacitors, I can care less. In fact, sometimes it can actually sound a little better with some smaller speakers. I'm only using this little amp with small speakers. My big speakers, I have the big JC5. I've got 4, 5, 10 times more capacitance. So it's like a different world. But I'm not squeamish about that. Unless they darn things blow up, which they often do. I mean, you can get a bad batch of Chinese capacitors. Trust me on this. You will be sorry, because they will not. They look like a deal, but when you work them and they blow up on you, then and the repair job bill is so great. But I wouldn't
Right.
change anything. I would, if you're happy with something and it sounds pretty good, what the heck? If your friends start telling you that it sounds kind of lousy and they, you go over to their house and it sounds better, then maybe you ought to do something.
I agree. Okay, we'll move on to a question from another member. Kurt, who's actually moving out of Arizona up to your neck of the woods, has a question for you. He has your JC1 monoblock amps, and he wants to know if you have a speaker preference to mate with these.
I found that let's just say this. The original JC1s, and of course the pluses would match this too, work really well with big electrostatic speakers. That's what we used to show them with. We used to go down to the audio engineer. We used to go down to,
LA show?
No, worse than that. A bigger, badder, Las Vegas. We used to go to Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
Yes.
And we used to rent a room, and we used to share with the big Roger West things, big speakers, floor to ceiling kind of things. They sounded great because the darn things have a lot of current capability, which is really good for that particular design, especially at high frequencies. Now, when as far as I've heard some hybrid type designs, I can't think of the name of the company. You guys probably know it. It's got a woofer on the bottom, and then it's got a little kind of a single panel that's kind of curved on the top, and
a ribbon
Martin
or
Logan.
it's electrostatic on the top.
It's Martin Logan.
Martin Logan, that's it. They
Okay.
sound great. They even sound great with a JC5. I don't know why, but they really do. I mean, they really sound better than I would expect. JC5 is a compromise. I mean, it's not all that JC1 is. That's just the way things work, That's why it's 1/3 the price, or or less. So
Yeah. Okay.
rated
Thank
power. It's sort of stupid. Go ahead.
You. All right. Well, thank you for that. Now we have another question from Peter, who apparently met you some years back and told me he wouldn't repeat the stories that you told him back then because it could be embarrassing. But he wants to know, how did the development of the Vendetta influence your design of the JC3 phono preamp?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. And actually, I was put in a very strange position. And that was that Richard, my boss at Parasound, said, John, we don't want you to use FETs for this design. So what we want you to do instead is we want a phono stage, but we don't want you to use, and we only want it to be used, originally it was supposed to be designed inside a JC2. So the JC2 was already designed. The JC3 was supposed to be an add-on insert for the JC2. So that's what we started off with. So I had to go to a different kind of design route, more compromised than I usually would be. And that would be using integrated circuits, which I don't usually do. I usually design all discrete stuff. So what happened was that I did it, made it very compact and small, but I insisted on certain things. The path is almost exactly the same as a Vendetta. The capacitors in the EQ are exactly the same as the Vendetta. So you get some of the Vendetta because I put it in there. And the darn thing came out better than, of course, most people would have expected. Even I would have expected. But a lot of that's due to those parts.
So the Vendetta had the discrete versus the
Yeah, for all practical purposes, the difference is, of course, the Vendetta's quieter and all that, and it's a more sophisticated thing. But the JC so happens the JC3 Junior, the little guy, which costs half as much, is virtually as good, or almost as good as the 3 Plus. So it's like, wow, you know, we really, that's when you do packaging properly. In other words, efficient packaging. Of course, it's not as pretty and it's not as well built on the inside, you know, real fancy to look at, but it works just about as well. It's the same.
Okay.
It's a heck of a bargain. That particular design is a heck of a bargain. You know, these darn things cost so much, you know, especially for people who don't do phono all the time. It's like, gee, you know, I make an $85,000 phono stage. You know, I mean, think about it. Is it worth it?
Not to me.
I'm going to show you guys something. I never thought of this before, but I know where it is. I'm going to show you an $85,000 circuit.
Oh, great. I can't wait to see that. Well, how's everybody doing?
I'm gonna get one of those on order right now.
Get a dozen and pass them out. They can be door prizes for the club.
Christmas present.
Door prizes for the club.
Doing okay here in Apache Junction.
Okay, Michael, thank you. And I can see some folks. Spicy Dave, you're looking good. Got your Home Depot orange going.
Well, here it is, guys. Now, this doesn't look as impressive now that I look at it compared to the schematic. The schematic just is mind-blowing. But this is basically, look back, that's 2 channels of without the power supply or anything, or a lot of other features. But it's just packed with parts. In here, if you can see in this, I got to pull it up where my fingers are. Just packed with fets in parallel, to get the noise down. You know,
whose phono stage is this designed for? Who did you design this one for, John?
Constellation.
Oh, you're designing for Constellation now too?
I did. This is a Constellation design.
This is an okay, a product you did years ago?
Yeah, I did it in 2012, something like that.
Wow. Constellation is a pretty high quality outfit. You respect their
Oh yeah. Well, they said I scared them though. I actually got this thing so pricey they were freaking out after a while. They said it doesn't matter what the cost is. I said, well, okay.
That was not the thing.
Hey, I wasn't getting the money. It was all going into the product.
Yeah.
If I may interject, what drives the cost? I mean, is it the actual components or is it the tooling? I mean, you know, the fab of the circuit boards, all that stuff. I mean, there's this myth in audio that most of the cost of high-end goes into the casework.
It does. You know what the casework for? I made a cheaper version of this. This actually might be the cheap version. I can't really tell. But this one is $85,000 too. It's the same board, basically, same basic, maybe slightly different input devices. The $85,000 for the $35,000. I think we paid up to $20,000 for the case OEM.
Wow.
Think about that.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah. That sounds a little D'Agostino-ish.
Well, who do we think you're competing with?
Yeah.
You got to compete with Dan. You know, look, I'm telling you, man. I had my stuff down in a dealer down in Santa Monica, and that was the last time I've ever really listened to the JC1. And I looked at all the beautiful D'Agostino stuff in the store. I mean, my stuff looked like doggy do compared to that stuff. That stuff is beautiful.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it is beautiful. I mean, it's jewelry, you know,
It is.
and we're just flat black, you know. I mean, just about, you know. I mean, it's so different. And I would rather not put so much money in the case, but you can't have a chintzy case either, because if it rattles or if it doesn't have any thickness, it won't shield properly.
Right.
So with the Vendetta, I mean, not the Vendetta, with the blowtorch, we actually hogged out our cases. But our cases got up to thousands of dollars, 3,000, I think, at the last time. So out of a $10,000 product, we were putting 3,000 in the cases. I mean, it was ridiculous.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned in the past, John, that you'd love to design one last mega amp. How would that be? Would that be, tell us about what your thoughts are on that product.
Well, most of my products follow from the cheapest, like the little guy that I still have running for 25 years. They all have the same basic circuit. I mean, in a general sense, they have basic circuit, the same circuit. But the thing that I developed a long time ago, in fact, it's been over 50 years since I did my first real heavy duty design of it. When I was at Ampex, I was in the research department, and I came up with this balanced bridge. Now, this is not new to everybody. I mean, Nelson uses balanced bridges. Krell and D'Agostino use balanced bridges. Trust me on this. When they want to. They don't always. We call it single-sided or balanced bridge. Now, a balanced bridge is essentially two amplifiers together, one operating out of phase with the other, so that when the speaker never sees ground. It only sees the outputs of the two amplifiers. It sees the negative going down on one and up positive on the other. That's the balanced bridge. Well, I build a perfectly 100% four-quadrant symmetrical, just absolutely perfect balanced bridge. And that's what I like to build, and that's what I will build. But I haven't built one for Parasound because Parasound never needed it. But I built one for Gale. I built one for a friend of mine, Brian Cheney. Maybe don't remember him. VMPS Audio years and years ago, and I built some for a company called Symmetry as well, back in the 70s. So I've had these designs kicking around for years and years. And today I could like to really build a big amplifier because you can get a lot more power out of it. But of course it takes double the size of the chassis. So that that chassis, that Parasound won't work. I'd have to go to twice the size at least.
Can you address the question that I have in the back of my mind about the one side says keep it all simple and small and that's what sounds best, and the other side that says you need a lot of power to really make things sound good? I mean, how do you put those two things together? I don't know if you understand.
It's hard. In fact, it's almost impossible to get both right. And I believe in a little bit of both. And I mean it. I'm kind of a compromiser in both directions. In other words, when it comes to Nelson will usually have more quiescent current just on his idle than I will at any power point that he makes his designs. He has bigger heat sinks too. I mean, why not? I mean, I'm good for him. I mean, that's a real advantage. Nelson is absolutely right about the first watt or the first 10 watts, let's say. Let's be realistic.
Yeah.
The first 10 watts. That's where we listen, man. 90%, not everybody, but most of us listen in that region. Or even less. I mean, that's a really high level. That's loud, really loud. Now, what about explosions? What about, fanfare for the common man? Somebody's hitting this great big thing, or the Kodo drums. I mean, you gotta have power. You'll never get that effect unless you have hundreds of watts. Now, how clean do those watts have to be? Do they have to be perfect? When they're at 300 watts, does it have to measure perfectly? Some people, some engineers, and they've attacked me in recent weeks even, about it. They said, John, your JC1 has measurable distortion above 50 watts. I said, yeah, and? They'll say, well, we could do better than that. I said, yeah, you could with more complication, adding more little circuits that fix distortions locally. I said, I don't want to do that because I don't think it makes it sound better, and I think it might even make it sound worse.
Right.
But they come back to me and say, but we can do 400 watts and you can't measure anything. Of course, it clips then, you know, right there. But or 300, maybe they only do 300, but it doesn't matter. Whatever. And they say, see how great we are? I said, yeah, you're a great engineer. So what? That doesn't mean that it's going to sound good.
Right.
I mean, it's scary, but it's true. Now, how much distortion is tolerable? I mean, 10%, 50%, a half a percent. I mean, I don't like to see a tenth of a percent if I can possibly help it. You know, more than a tenth of a percent. But I don't believe that you have to have 0.001% or 0.001 or even 0.01 at full output. I just don't see the point.
Yeah, I agree.
At least in a power amp.
Now, someone like Roger Sanders Sound, you may know him. He makes his electrostatic speaker, and he's a believer in high power.
Oh, he
He's
needs
an
it.
engineer by. Yeah, he needs it, and he believes in it, and he says he doesn't think an amp should be below, any amp should be under 500 watts per channel, or you're going to get clipping.
That's for
You have
him.
an opinion?
That's him. That's his
Yeah.
speakers, not our speakers. Look, the Wilson audios that I have sitting in my living room, they're 92 SPL per watt. That means that where I'm actually sit, it might be 90 SPL at 1 watt out. That means that at 10 watts out, it'll be 10 dB more, or 110. 100 decibels. That's 10 watts. I mean, I don't listen at 100. I don't listen that loud. I don't dare. I live in an apartment building. Now, if I was out in the middle of nowhere and I was half deaf or something, and I wanted to listen to the Grateful Dead, full tilt boogie. I mean, yeah, you want to feel the Grateful Dead, you got to go to 120. I mean, you do. I know because I've been on stage. I've had a sound level meter. I know what we can do. We used to do it. But it's all in the deep bass. You know, it's like it's stuff that hits your body. You know, as much as it hits your ear. You don't want to hurt your ears.
No, we've already done that.
Well, no, you know, those cheap PA systems where they use the horns and they just squawk and they clip and all that in the mid-range. That's the bad place. You know, that's where you get listening fatigue. You don't get listening fatigue from bass. You know, heavy drums, Kodo drum type stuff. You know, that can be exciting.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a couple more questions on my list, John. I thank you for your time, and I don't want to run you over too much more than I asked you to produce. But what would you say is which of your accomplishments are you most proud of?
Oh, both the Vendetta and the CTC blowtorch.
Okay.
Both of those. That's what I'm using now, and I'll use for the rest of my life.
All right.
That's it. You know, that's my baby. Now I have a new Vendetta theoretically in the back. You know, in the workshop and all. It's a lot simpler than that thing I just showed you. It has 1/10 of parts that the one I showed you, because I believe in simple. The one that I showed you, which is the Constellation, I'll put it up again just to remind you guys of what it kind of looks like.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of crap. That's one channel. I mean, it's just row after row of stuff. But they wanted what they wanted was something else. What they wanted, in fact, I had to tell them, look, guys, do you want a race car or do you want a comfort car? I said, what you're telling me is you want a race car with a full Murphy bed in your back seat. And I said, you can't have both. You can't win F1 races with a Murphy bed in your back seat. Now, what do you want? You know, and that I had to deal with them, fight with them. Who in the hell is you?
So you're going to come out with a new version of the Vendetta with Parasound or somebody else?
No, it's idle until I find a sponsor.
Oh.
I have the parts. I have the super special parts that I could put in the Vendetta that I used to build in the old Vendettas. They're not made anymore. They haven't been made. They're $25 a piece now, these parts. And I have lots of them to make. I can make hundreds of units if I wanted to. So I can make a Vendetta 2 thing. But nobody's come up to me and said, oh yeah, even Parasound hasn't done it. They just don't want to bother with
What would it have to retail for, John?
Yeah, I don't know. I just built a design about $10,000, and I think it'll have to be in that region or maybe a little more.
Well,
I don't. It could be cheaper if I put a cheaper case. It's mostly the case cost again. We tried to build a case. We built a case, and we built it half the size. And we thought, well, we'll not use hogging out is what we did with the old case. That's where you take a solid block of aluminum and you literally, hollow it out. So we said, well, can't we do something as good, and looks good from the outside, but isn't that hard? So a friend of mine, brilliant guy, designing, mechanical engineer, just for heck of it, he built me a design. We got it built, and we have it in the other room. When the machinist got done, he says, look, man, he said, this thing is so complex to build. You might as well hog it out. It's cheaper and easier. And it's true. There are cheap and dirty ways of making like sheet metal where you just form it, you just bend it and this and that. You make it out of steel or something. But we don't like to do that. We like to use aluminum. We like to use it really thick. You got to have really thick aluminum or it won't shield it all. It'll shield the high frequencies, but not the low frequencies. In fact, it doesn't even a half-inch thick aluminum doesn't shield very well at 60 cycles or something. But it doesn't resonate. What we do is we hit it with our fingernail. It's like a fingernail test. Go around to different pieces of Wi-Fi stuff and hit it with your fingernail. Just ding. If it goes ding, then they got a problem. If it goes ding, you just then just the sound of your fingernail. Okay.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you another question I had set aside for you, John.
Sure.
Have you studied the human ear as it relates to your work?
Not as exotic as anybody. I mean, I read some of the research, and I do know, as a matter of just experience, that what we hear is different than what we measure. I mean, I just know what we can hear. That's why I always say, trust your ears. Always. People laugh at me and say, oh, you can't trust your ears. You're crazy, and all that. No, you got to trust your ears. That's the only thing you got that really matters. The measurements don't matter unless, it's nice to you get good measurements. Engineers like that. But you got to trust your ears. If it sounds good, it doesn't matter what it measures. Some stuff measures kind of lousy and can just sound good. Wow, that's interesting. You got to have.
Okay. Well, I thank you for that. I agree. All right. Well, the last question I had for you here was, what might be the next product you expect to release?
I honestly don't know. I hope it'll be this big amplifier that we can't get started on because of the virus. I can't get technicians to work with me right now. I have technicians nominally hired, but I can't put them on in. It's too inconvenient to run around and work in masks and stuff. So I've just said, let's wait it out till the virus dies down. Here in Berkeley, we're very touchy about that kind of stuff. Everybody's running around with a mask. They won't let me in. They won't let me outside my door without a mask. I mean, I'm not talking about my front door. I'm just talking about my apartment door.
That's right. Well, you're in Berkeley with my friend's store, Music Lovers. Is that a retailer that has any of your product?
Well, they're funny guys, I've known them forever. I used to have my shop. I used to have a shop in about 1995. I had it right next door to their old store. They used to have an old store, and they actually had two old stores, and they moved twice, and we became friendly then, really friendly, and it was nice. But they got kicked off at Parasound, And
Oh.
they got kicked off of Parasound at that time. It doesn't matter anymore what happened. But what happened is that Parasound had a guy, a marketing guy, and he was separate from the boss. That now he's not there anymore. And he decided to put on the good guys, like Best Buy and the good guys and that kind of people,
Yeah.
as Parasound sales people. Okay, I mean, for retail. Well, what happened is all the little guys realized that they were undercutting. They would actually offer maybe under the table or whatever discount to the customer. So the customer would come to, let's say, Sounds Like, listen to the Parasound, and then go to the good guys and buy the thing.
Yeah. And
so they got really ticked off at Parasound. But when I went over there a few times over the years, this was years ago, I used to go over on a regular basis. They had a bunch of Parasound equipment sitting there. They weren't even showing it. They weren't doing anything because customers wanted it. They were just making a profit on the stuff without having to show it. So in a way, they were ripping us off. But but yeah, I know those guys. They really are a good high-end dealer. I mean, they're not no slouch.
Good.
So they still sell my stuff, but they don't advertise it or anything.
Yeah. Let me put it out to the membership as I run through my list of questions. Does anyone else want to ask a question? What do we have down here in the chat box? I haven't even looked at that. Oh, there's a lot of questions in the chat box.
If you can tolerate it,
let's.
If you got.
Okay, so what? All right, can you find that chat box, John, or do you want me to read it to you?
No, I got the chat box. I can hit it and see what it says. It says, number one, somebody's buying. Kurt's going to buy Maggie's. Okay, so what?
Maggie 20.7s. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, well, that's not a question.
Yeah, he says, based on, I might have to add a Macintosh Tube 2-channel preamp to my system. 2-channel preamp. Now, that's interesting. Mac Tube stuff sounds awfully good. Back in the old days, the old tube stuff, the C22, I lived with one for a year. I used to sell them, in fact, at a high-end store, and I loved them. They were a wonderful piece of, really easy listening, but really elegant in its own way, and really smooth. One of the best preamps of that type in the world. Now, somebody else is saying, okay, nothing. What makes an amp sound good? I don't know. I mean, I would say lack of crossover distortion, but, and reasonable speed. We used to have amplifiers that measured good with nominal tones, but they didn't do transients very well. That's not true anymore. So steel is better for chassis? No, I don't like steel at all. The reason we don't like steel is not because we don't know that it has properties like, it's strong and it can be handled, machined or fabricated easily, but because of its hysteresis properties, we find that it seems to add to the sound. So we tend not to use steel. Although, admittedly, there's a lot of steel tube stuff out there that's been around forever, Who's to say it made that much difference then? And then somebody says, what the model of the 25-year amp you still use? Oh, that's the HCA 1000. That was the early one. Richard asked me, it must have been 1993 or something. He says, we got to make something cheaper and easier to build. Can you give me a circuit for a cheaper and easier amp? And so we came up with this. I came up with a circuit that I use today, basically, today, even with the big stuff. I changed the circuit out and simplified it a little bit. Kind of like what, other guys, my competitor, my associates do. simple is better. So and it wound up being this little HD 1000, and that's what I use. And I use these two-way Sequoia speakers that I got from Dick Sequoia, so I got a heck of a deal. And so it's not like I can necessarily recommend them to them. They would sell for about $1,000 probably on the average. You get the same quality, but they're awfully good sounding little guys for what I use them for, which is television and background music from the cable, and that's all. I don't use them for phono. I don't use them for high quality FM or anything like that. So, do you?
What do you think about Class D stuff?
Huh?
What do you think about Class D? There's a question in there about Class D.
Is it there? I don't see it. I'm going to move. Try to move this. Class D. I like Class. I mean, Class D has been around a long time. Actually, you'd be surprised. The problem with Class D is that it always has certain trade-offs, and it's always had these trade-offs, and it still does. I mean, in other words, I'm going to reset this chat thing just a second. See if I can get a better, clearer picture. When it makes an amp sound good, one model. I don't see the Class D thing. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Well,
the thing
it's
is
anyway,
after what? After what?
After the 25-year amp that you're still using it. Somebody asked about Class D, but I think we're all curious what you do think about Class D, since it seems to be up and coming.
I mean, there are guys who make good Class D stuff, and this fellow, there's a European guy, his name, he makes really good stuff.
Which guy?
No, can't think of his name. He's fairly young. Huh?
It's not Jean-Claude from Sweden?
No.
Valve?
No,
from Germany?
He's from Holland.
Holland, okay.
His name is Bruno Putsky.
Sorry, who was it?
I think his name is Bruno Putsky.
Bruno.
Is that the name you're thinking of, John?
It's Bruno. I think it's the guy.
Okay.
And he's the dude. I've known him a long time too. He's an arrogant little, anyway. He thinks he knows everything, and it's kind of funny to listen to him. And he writes things about feedback is wonderful, use as much as you can, and all that sort of thing. and he does. And my people, the people at Parasound will send me this. Well, what do you think? Bruno says this. I said, well, that's Bruno's opinion, And no, really, it's fascinating. But I know Bruno knows how to make Class D amps. He makes the best Class D amps that I know exist. It's a problem. Class D, probably for woofers. Let's say you need a lot of power, and you have a multi-way system, then probably Class D would be quite a winner. It could be quite the winner. It could do the job for you. For the money, for the heat dissipation. Put your heat dissipation in your mid-range and your tweeter. You don't have to put it into the woofer. But I don't use Class D here, so I don't know. I tested a bunch of it over the years, and they always measured a lot worse than they advertised, and I really rubbed their noses in it. The guys about it, and I mean, why not? I mean, they wanted me to evaluate it. I evaluated it, and I said, listen, I can do this just as good with a Class B amp. I said, I don't need you to, why should we go to all this trouble for this, quality of measurement, or even measured performance, much less listening performance? Because they always have an output, they always have trouble. They have an output filter on them, and the output filter is necessary. It's a necessary evil. And it gets better and better, but it never goes away. And the problem is with that output filter is that it'll screw up the damping on like your tweeters and stuff. It's just its nature. You can't do anything else.
So your opinion is that the Class D is best used as if you were biamping a speaker
Yeah,
for your woofer.
I wouldn't use it full range. I wouldn't.
Yeah, just on the woofer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, let's see what else we have on our list of questions. Paul says, what are your small speakers and what parasound do you use at home?
Oh yeah, as I said before, they're the Sequera speakers. They're a little two-way. They're just about like this tall and this wide. They're like a sort of a large LS35A, if you remember that, Rogers LS35A. They're small. I don't even use them with the subwoofer. I use them for television and for background blues and rock and roll, which I get from the cable, from Comcast. That's all it's connected to.
Okay. Another member's asking who owns a Vendetta, by the way. Do you offer any upgrades to the Vendetta?
Not as such, no. I don't recommend most of the upgrades now. Now, it's not because the upgrades don't work, but my technicians have gotten too old to do the job properly.
Okay. So
I mean, it's sad but true. And I'm just as old as they are, so I have trouble. I have the original Vendetta that was reviewed in Stereophile magazine under my desk right now, and I've got to finish it off. And every time I let my technician touch it, I started to cry. So I decided, I told my tech, I said, man, I'm sorry, you can't work on Vendettas anymore. He says, well, why? I said, because your work isn't up to it.
Oh.
And I mean, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
It should be embarrassing for him too. It's embarrassing for him now, but he at first was sort of not just. He said, "Doesn't it work?" Yeah, I said it works, but is it going to be reliable? And it looks like you just threw the thing together. There are people who do that, but I don't do that.
Okay, here's another question which I'm curious about as well. On your JC1 amps, how many of the initial amps are Class A before they go to Class B? AB, sorry.
Well, the design center is supposed to be about 1.35 amps is the quiescent current over 12 devices. So it's a little over a tenth of an amp per device. And it doesn't, it's just, it winds up being about 25 watts into 8 ohms, but it's only 12.5 watts into 4 ohms. And then it's only like 6 watts into 2 ohms. So it really is pretty pitiful when if you're driving really, really, really low impedances.
Right, but if you had efficient speakers, you might get mostly Class A.
Oh yeah, the whole idea is that even with medium efficiency speakers, you should be Class A all the time. You don't need those extra watts. The extra watts are in there to sell the product, sort of. It's like the guy, I had to hold back. I had to, as I was starting to say, and I may not have finished it, the JC1 Plus was supposed to be 500 watts. And I said, this is too much because it'll trade off quality at below 10 watts. I said, well, I'll have a 10 watt quiescent current instead of 25 watt. I said, we don't want that. We want to have the quiescent current up, and that's a trade-off. It's one or the other with the same heat package, heat dissipation package. And my boss went back to the old voltages. We just made a stiffer power supply, so we wound up with 450 watts, so they could brag about something that we improved. But it isn't very much. We went from like 425 watts to 450 or something. Big deal. But we couldn't do it anything else. Yeah. But the Taiwanese engineers who do a lot of the work, they do most of the work. They wanted more they wanted more power. They wanted to brag about the power. and they could care less about what it sounds like. They probably never listened to it in their life. I mean, that's just the way they are. I mean, they're good. A good engineer is not necessarily a good audio listener. That's where
Yeah.
you look at the stuff on the internet. Sometimes you get this people criticizing us. Oh, they buy cables and they do this and they do that. And they don't know. They don't know what cables sound like. These people, they have no idea.
So you do believe the first watts of Class A are important
Absolutely.
in terms of.
In fact, if I could measure any measurable distortion between 1 and 10 watts, I'd be very, very nervous. But I can't. I never start measuring until I'm at least start at 10 watts, then keep going up. It's just pointless. I mean, I make it so Class A and so smooth in that region that that's what my whole deal is. The rest of it is just add on to keep it from clipping. I mean, I don't want it to be bad. I want it to be as good as possible, but I don't go to extra strength, extra lengths. It'd be just like this. Think about if you were a person who was driving a car, and you were driving a car mostly in traffic and maybe on boulevards. Would you really need a supercharger or even a turbocharger? And some people would say, well, I'm kind of used to it. I have this little tiny motor and I use it all the time. I'm screaming with it, But other people would say, if I have enough displacement in my original car and just runs smooth, I have enough torque to do the job of passing somebody, within reason. I'm not in a race. If you're not in a race, who needs that extra horsepower that the supercharger makes?
Yeah.
You don't. No. I wish my Porsche had a supercharger, but it doesn't, or a turbocharger. But but then I like to race sometimes. That's a different story.
Oh, that is a different story. Okay, here's another question from Peter. Do you have parts laying around to make a blowtorch?
Not really.
Okay.
Actually, I do sort of, but it would be too expensive.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be worth your while. It would be more, once you get out of the habit, when you're in the habit of making things like, in a limited volume, you have all your stuff, ducks in a row, if you know what I mean. You got all your parts in a row, you got your parts in little bins, and you just build it, one after the other. But when you have to start from scratch, oh boy. Then you got to find every part, you got to bend between every part, you got to bend them all, you got to put them in, then you got to cut the lengths off after you've soldered them in. On and on and on it goes. And it takes twice or three times longer than it would have if I had, let's say I made a run of 10 of something, and then, then things speed up because you have a limited assembly line, you might say.
Okay. Understood. Now here's the last question I have here from Rick, and it seems to be cut off a little bit, but I'll read what I can read. Every hybrid integrated amp I know of employs tubes in the input stage and solid state in the output stage. I think it would give a good and that's where it cuts off. Rick, where are you?
I have the whole thing.
Okay.
It says strengths and weaknesses of each. If you could explain why this is the best approach. I am considering the purchase of either, was it an Aesthetics, Mimas? I don't know what that is, or the new Macintosh MA362. Do you think these hybrids are viable compromise for electrostatic or dynamic hybrid speakers? Honestly, I don't know, but I will say this. Tubes, just adding a tube on the front end of an amplifier will make it sound better, all else being equal. I don't do it, but every time I heard it, it's better. PS Audio makes a power amp, and they put tubes in the front end. The tube is only just there. I mean, it doesn't do much. Might have a gain of 5 or 10 or something, but it doesn't do hardly anything. But adding that tube makes a difference to the sound. And I like that sound. I have my electrostatic headphones, my Stax electrostatics headphones are tube driven. Man, they are great. That's the only way to do it. I've lived with stacks for years and years and years and years. 99% of the time, solid state amps sounded like dog poo on them, man. I tell you. And you know, the only one that I really, really, really liked was the best of the best was the old Audio Research 150, which was made in like 1975, 74, and it was a wonderful headphone amp. It didn't drive speakers as well, but it really drove those electrostatic headphones wonderfully. I mean, just wonderfully, with a step-up transformer, of course. But the later stacks drivers, you know, they actually have direct drive tubes. You know, the tubes drive right to the capacitive elements directly. That's wonderful. That's the way to do it. I couldn't make a solid state sound as good as that with a headphone amp. There's no way.
Okay. Well, perhaps we should. I think we're run out of questions here, but I'll try to sort of round things up by asking you about the latest rumors you've heard about different people in the industry that you want to pass around to sort of, you know, gossip. Did
You know,
Michael?
I don't know, but well, you better
Michael
tell me who.
Did you hear something from Michael Fremmer about something he didn't want to review in the future?
Oh, that. Oh, yeah. I caught him on that. I have it I have it here on my computer, the same one I'm using now. And when this guy comes over tomorrow, thank you for reminding me, I'm going to show the representative of the company, look, this is what I was afraid of. And you guys, you know, are using my name improperly. Okay. And I got it on tape, man. I got the videotape of Fremmer interviewing the guy and asking him the right questions. I think it's just funny as heck. I mean, and I'm glad they got him. You know, you get them by the, you know, cannolis or whatever. And it's great because you could yell at them forever and they'll deny it. And they'll deny it. And they'll deny it. But when you have the proof,
Yeah.
then it makes it easier, you know, for me. So I'm really glad that, was it you that brought that up?
Yeah, well, I had seen it, and I just asked you about it because I didn't know you were designing for IFI.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Right.
Well, they're not a bad outfit. They just want to use my name, you know, everywhere they can. And they pay me, you know, they pay me a consult, you know, I'm a consulting fee, you might say, or whatever you want to call it. What is it called for a lawyer? Retainer, you know, a retainer.
Retainer, yeah.
And but they use me more than they should. So they use my name. That's what they want. Trust me, they want my name. They don't care about me much. Well, they have good designers of their own.
John, there was another story, though, that you relate about Fremmer and being someplace with the wife of somebody who makes phono stages, maybe, or maybe just turntables, but apparently they were on political opposites, and he decided he was unhappy about her position politically and wasn't going to review their products again.
Yeah, I thought that you know, arguing politics and not doing a review job is kind of unfortunate. I mean, I think trying to punish people, especially the husband, who's the real designer, not the wife.
Yeah.
And maybe she is a radical. You know, I met several Russian people who come over to this country and then they get really radicalized themselves, you know, in different funny ways. I don't know why. You'd think they'd be happy just being here.
Yeah.
You know, but they're not, you know. And Fremmer, you know, he's pretty far out there, him and a few other guys. And so I'll call him on it. If I talk to him, I would call him on it. I'd say, hey, man, look, have you seen the latest picture of Fremmer? There was one in Facebook today.
I did.
Look, maybe you guys don't belong. I don't know. And he's got his hair. You know how I tie my hair back now because I've been old man. I don't care. But the Fremer, has regular hair and it's grown because he hasn't been able to get a haircut. Now he looks like Einstein, man. I mean, he really is out there. He's really out. Everybody's like, what's with your hair, man? And that's what he looks like today.
Yeah.
Different because as people around here, I don't know what do you guys have? We had barbers allowed to cut people's hair on appointment like for a week in the last 3 months, and then they shut it down again.
Yeah.
We're trying to kill that virus thing. We're really paranoid around here, which is good.
Well, yeah, we're all fighting it. We're all fighting it, and hopefully we're winning finally.
I don't know. I heard you guys in Arizona are getting into real trouble. Isn't that
Well, our cases have dropped 50% in the last couple of weeks. So
I noticed that. What'd you guys do? Not go out in the sun or something?
Oh, I think we just
go out and play around in the swimming pool. What is it?
We killed off all the weaklings, and now the strong people are left.
That's true. Well, that will happen to us all if we're not careful.
Yeah,
we're kill off all the weaklings, and then everybody will be immune to this thing. Well, let's just hope the vaccines really do kick in soon.
Yeah,
I'm an old man. I'm a pretty healthy guy comparatively speaking, but I'm not the man I used to be, and I'd hate to get something, man.
How is Richard doing? Do you know? Richard Schramm is health okay?
He's just locked up. He can't do anything. He's much worse off than me. Most of my colleagues are worse off than me by a long shot. I just have to stay here in my place. He has to. Richard can't see anybody because he's on these things that reject his
immune system.
Lowers the immune system, and if he got anything, he'd probably die. So, but I'm glad for Richard, and he seems to be okay. Everything else besides, and he's running the business, and it's the business is okay comparatively speaking.
Parasound's doing all right. That's good
so far as I can tell. They'll tell me anyway, and that's as good as I can get. But I mean, I really do think that they're doing okay.
Yeah.
Whereas he's had bad years, but not this year as much. Some other, the people who run restaurants and haircutters and personal services, they're the ones that are really suffering.
Yeah.
You can't do it. Some people they can kind of run. You put somebody. Okay, one guy's assigned to the warehouse this morning, or this afternoon, and that's it. He works alone. You don't have to worry about getting contact with anybody.
Is most of Parasound's business done from retailers or from their website?
I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know how they sell their stuff.
Okay. All right. Well, if anyone else doesn't have a question, I think we should say to John, thank you so much for agreeing to come and spend an hour and a half with our club. We really enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. I did. I'm sure the rest of the people feel the same way.
Good. Yeah, and I learned a lot about Zoom, which I needed to know. And I almost didn't get it going today because you weren't around. And I thought, oh, boy. But I got it together, sort of, maybe.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sean. We appreciate your experience, your background, your history, and all your great stories. It's a lot of fun for us. We're all sitting around home.
Yeah, that's true. We're all sitting around home anyway. Sitting around the fire, telling wild stories.
That's it.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
Thanks again,
Thank
John.
you.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks. It was great.
Yeah. Talk to you again.
Bye-bye.